And you know, if you're like me, I really didn't know if our voting was over or not. Well, it's not in Simpson County. And Tim Gray, who is running again for Chancery Clerk, will be on the ballot. But there's some things that he can tell us about voting, I think, that will help all of you.
Well, in a couple of weeks, we do have a runoff election. We have a couple of runoff elections. In both of those elections, they're Republican. And a lot of people think if you hadn't already voted, if you didn't vote the first time, that you can't vote now. But that's not necessarily true. If you, in this case, if you voted as a Democrat, you can't vote in a Republican runoff. But if you didn't vote, you can vote. And if you voted as a Republican, of course, you can vote. The only thing that would exclude you from voting in this round, in this runoff election, would be if you voted in the other party's primary.
So you can't flip-flop. Can't flip-flop. But I do think a lot of people are not aware that you can vote if you did not vote the first
That's
time.
definitely the case. And I've seen a lot of people that's told me, I can't vote this time because I didn't vote the last time. But that's not necessarily the case. The thing is, in our last election, only about 30% of the registered voters voted. So the turnout was really low, and it's very important, you know. We're so blessed to live in a country where we get to choose who runs our business, who runs our county, who runs our state. And we need to take every opportunity to make sure that we're getting the right people in those positions. And I hope everybody will turn around and come back out and vote in this runoff. It's a big election.
It is.
You know, there's, in our county, in our state, and our nation, inflation has grown to where everything costs so much. Even, I know the roads are a big topic of conversation in the supervisor runoffs. But it just costs so much to do things, and you know, the public just needs to make sure that they have the person in that position supporting them and doing the things that they really want done to move the county forward.
Well, you know, talking about the 30%, when we talk about this over and over, how do you get people to vote? I mean, what else is left for us to do unless we can get it in their souls? Is all I can figure out.
I really don't know. You know, I know the sheriff race always drives people out more so than anything, but the people just want something to kind of encourage them to get out and do it. They want to have a reason to go vote for somebody.
Well, you know, I really think that the people that do vote, that 30%, need to take a challenge in bringing someone to vote with them. Because at least they are voters.
So that'd be great.
And you know, if they would say, well, I'm going to commit to getting one more person to go vote with me, look what that would do.
And, you know, me, of course, I'm a politician. There's nothing I can do to get them out except go and try to reach out to as many of them as I can. But it's so crucial that people get out and stand up for their rights. You know, it's one of the few rights, or it's one of the main rights that we have left, and we don't need to take that for granted.
Okay, when is your election?
I have an election in November.
That's what I thought.
And you know, I was on the ballot this last time. I was unopposed, but I do have a Democratic opponent in November.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
You know, I had never seen a ballot with that many unopposed. I will say that.
I had not either.
And I say it over and over, but it's the truth.
It really is.
It was so surprising when I know you were happy to see it.
I was. I told my wife when that was over, I said, if everything was just that stress-free, it would be great.
Just sit up there enjoying them all coming. You know, tell us a little bit about what you found out about your job since you've been in it now.
Well, you know, a year ago we started this quest to try to get in that office, and the people were very gracious to come out and vote for me. It was a pretty good turnout, and we did pretty well as far as getting into the office. And I come in and was sworn in on December the 9th, and that's a pretty special day for me. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. But so I was sworn in on the 9th, but then 3 weeks later I had to turn around and qualify to run again. And so I did take the first few months in office and really focus on the office and try to figure out everything I needed to know about the office. Now, to tell you I know it all would not be true, but I can tell you that I went into the office to just kind of hit the ground running, and the first thing that I did, I kind of looked at some of the financial stuff and made sure that everything that was supposed to be accounted for was accounted for and accounted for properly. I'll tell you, Mr. Tommy Joe had done a really good job of setting things up in there. So I didn't have a whole lot of work to do there, other than I did take a few things and move them to a spreadsheet that was just a little bit more efficient, a little bit less room for error. And then after that, I just started going into the different branches of the office and trying to get involved with everything as much as I can. Of course, when we were campaigning, the thing that came up so much was the amount of commitments for drugs and alcohol and that type of stuff. And I can tell you that in our county, that's a problem. As of this morning, we've had 101 people come into that office to be committed since the first of the year. And that's a lot. We're about halfway through the year here. Of that, about 20% of it is drugs and alcohol, and 80% of it is mental. And it's it's a really, really tough deal, and it's tough on the family. It's very heart-wrenching when you see people come in that really have a problem and they want to do better. They just got to try to figure out how to do it. And through that process with us, it's really a Band-Aid, if you will. We get the people in, we get them kind of cleaned up and get them on some medication and get them started on the journey. But it's a long journey. If you're having drugs and alcohol problem or mental health problems, it's not something you can cure in a couple of weeks. And in a lot of cases, it's not something you can really cure.
Well, we really don't have enough facilities.
You don't, all we can do is kind of get them started on that journey and make sure that they have everything they need to succeed. Unfortunately, especially on the mental health side, we see a lot of kind of repeat offenders to where that they go through the programs, they're getting better, and a few months down, they kind of self-medicate or whatever, and they wind up back in the same situation. So it's tough. It's tough. It's an expensive process. It costs the county a lot of money. I've told people in the past, and I've never shied from the fact that I'm a Christian, and I have been for a long time. But when you see these families that are struggling, and when you see this type of stuff going on in the family, a lot of times it's the absence of Christ in their life. And when you see people move toward Christ, you see some of those problems kind of start to take care of themselves. And we're blessed to live in a region where we've got some pretty good facilities out there, some longer term facilities out there that people can go through and help. They'll help with their problem, but they also, a lot of them are Christian based and start to try to drive their mindset to a different place. And so so that's been a big part of what I do in the office is the committal process. And probably the next biggest thing there is probably youth court. And I really didn't talk a whole lot about youth court going in, because I really didn't know. But I mean, the truth is that's where the majority of the problems are in our county. And it's very unfortunate, because that's the future of our county.
Yes.
And so I told you earlier on the commitments I'd done a little over 100. Well, as of this morning, I've done 308 new youth court cases since January. And probably 95% or better of those cases, it's really a drug and alcohol problem, where the parents are on drugs and alcohol, and the children suffer from it. But it's the same thing. When I was raising my kid, and I wasn't the model parent by any shape, form, or fashion, but there were times when me and my kids, you could feel where a wedge was being drawn for one reason or another. and we had a thing, just a simple thing, we would sit down at the table and everybody, we'd go around, everybody would say, you know, what's the best thing that happened to you today? What's the worst thing that happened to you? It's a very simple thing, but it gets the conversation started. You know, I think a lot of what goes on with the youth court stuff outside of the drugs is the fact that there's no communication. And so, people need to get back to the table. We gotta get it to the point where there's communication's going on in the family. I really think that's one of the big problems.
Well, I can tell your heart is really in it.
It is.
That you are vested in these youth and all of our adults in our county.
Yeah.
Okay, remind one more time when we vote again.
It's November is it 7th?
That sounds about right.
And then the
29th.
2 weeks from tomorrow.
2 weeks from Tuesday, the 29th, is when we have the runoff election.
November 7th.
And then the other election's November 7th, so we're gonna get it all straight. But you are not completely voted already. You gotta keep voting this month, and I
That's
hope you'll
exactly
remember it and step out. And like I said, take your neighbor with you. We've got to get those numbers up.